My book.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to begin this special board meeting. Where'd Mary go?
She forgot something. She had to run get something. Sorry.
Well, I'll start. I would like to call this special board meeting of July 28, 2015 to order. The time is 5:07 p.m. The purpose of today's meeting is to hold a public hearing to consider the adoption of the 2015-2016 tentative millage rates and the 2015-2016 tentative budget. At this time, we request that all cellular phones be turned off or put in the silent mode. I would like to take this opportunity to remind members of the public of the district's mission, which is to ensure that each student reaches his or her highest personal potential, and the district's vision to be a world-class school system. Today's agenda includes presentation on the percent of increase-decrease over the rollback rate, proposed millage, budget overview, proposed tentative budget, public hearing on the tentative budget, and adoption of the required local effort millage, basic discretionary millage, capital outlay millage, resolution determining revenues and millages, and resolution adopting the tentative millage rates for fiscal year 2015-16, fiscal year 16 tentative budget and related resolution adopting the tentative budget, acceptance of the 2015 certification of taxable value, scheduling of the final budget public hearing, comments from board members, board attorney, and superintendent. Board members, is there a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. LaRiviere, seconded by Mrs. Dozier. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Mr. Teuber, did I hear you? Aye. Motion passes 5-0. I will now turn the meeting over to Dr. Nancy Graham, Superintendent, and Dr. Amy Desimore, Assistant Superintendent, Business and Finance.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. As the board knows, we're required to have 2 hearings on the budget, and this is the first of those hearings. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Desimore.
Good afternoon, Dr. Graham, members of the board. As Dr. Graham said, this hearing is the first of 2 public hearings that are required under Florida statute to give the public an opportunity to provide input into the proposed millage levy and the budget for this fiscal year 2015-2016. The superintendent did submit her proposed tentative budget to you all on July 23 when you received a package of material which included information on the tentative budget. This hearing was advertised in the news press on Friday, July 24. The second and final public hearing by your approval will be held on Tuesday, September 8th at 5:05 p.m. at this same place, and the notice of that meeting to the public will be through a direct mailing from the property appraiser's office. That mail document is known as the TRIM document or Truth and Millage Notice and is sent as is required by law. So as outlined by TRIM requirements, the first thing that we must do is discuss the millage rollback rate. The millage rollback rate is the millage which, when applied to the current year's tax roll, net of adjustments for new growth, would produce the same dollars as we received in the previous year. The calculated rollback rate for this year is 6.9977 mils. We are actually proposing to levy 7.285 mils, and that's an increase of 4.11% over the rollback rate. The proposed millage for the 2015-2016 school year is 7.285 mils, which is actually a decrease of our current millage, a decrease of 0.131 mils from the 2014-2015 rate of 7.416. The new millage rate will generate $26.5 million more than the previous year, even though it is a lower millage rate because of the increase in the tax roll. As you see, when you look at the comparison of millage over the last several years, our millage reached a high in 2011 of 8.015, and since then has been decreasing, and that is an indication of the fact that our tax roll is continuing to go up. And this year we saw a little over a 7% increase in our tax roll, which is a very positive indication. So that brings us down to our 2016 rate that we're proposing to levy of 7.285. As I mentioned before, as you look at the tax roll history, you see that since 2012, we have been steadily increasing within on our tax roll. So that is very good news. And again, a little bit over a 7% increase for this fiscal year. So again, a very positive indication as far as our local economy and that real estate tax base is concerned. When we look at the practical side of this, in other words, what does this millage really mean? And we're proposing to levy 7.285, which is basically $7.29 almost on each $1,000 of taxable value. We have a slide here that shows what the effect would be on different homeowners depending on what the value of their home is. So when you look at this, we've done a scenario where we show increases of 7.3%, which is the percentage rate that our tax roll increased. So of course, every taxpayer will see different increases in their property depending on what that property is, but on average, that increase for this year is 7.3%. So when you look at, for example, a house that was valued at $100,000 last year, their tax based on our tax rate last year of 7.416 was $556.20. This year, with the new tax rate of 7.285, that value, if increased 7.3%, would give them new taxes for the fiscal year of $599.56, which is an increase of about $43.36. And so we've done that scenario for several different values at 7.3%. And then we've also done that value with an increase of 3% on property value, which, as you know, under Save Our Homes, the increase for property value is capped at 3% if you have that Save Our Homes exemption. So for a $100,000 house last year that was valued with Save Our Homes, the new value would be $103,000, and that particular taxpayer would see an increase of a little over $12. The total proposed millage levy is broken into 3 different pieces. The first piece, which is required local effort, we are proposing to levy at 5.037, and that proposed amount to be raised of that millage is $334,277,552. It is important to note that the required local effort millage is set by the state. We have no control over what that millage is set at, but according to state statute, you all must levy that millage in order to take advantage of any of the other state revenues that would come through us through the FEFP. You have the basic discretionary millage of 0.748, and the proposed amount to be raised from that millage is $49,640,582. And you have the capital outlay levy at 1.5. The proposed amount to be raised by that levy, $99,546,622. For, as we mentioned, a proposed total millage levy of 7.285 and a proposed amount to be raised by all 3 of those millage levies at $483,464,756. Now, as outlined in the superintendent's proposed tentative budget that you all received, the total proposed budget for the 2015-2016 budget year for all funds is $1,334,012,693, as is broken out in the different 6 fund types as you see in front of you. Now, for the public's information, we have 6 different funds in the budget, and each of them are earmarked for for specific purposes. We have the general fund, and that is the major fund within our school district budget, set up for the education of students and the operating expenses for the district. It's where most of the action happens. You have our debt service fund, which is utilized for the payment of debt, principal and interest payments of the school district, and that money comes from a transfer from our capital funds in order to pay our debt service each year. We have our capital funds, the second major fund within the budget, and it's used to build schools, buy equipment, and provide maintenance throughout the district on all of our capital assets. You have the food service fund, which supports the breakfast and lunch program for all students. That fund is self-sustaining and receives no other revenue from any other fund. We have the special revenue funds, and that is all the federal funds that we received from the federal government used for the specific purpose that is outlined in the grant. And then we have our internal service funds, which accounts for the insurance costs of the district, both health insurance and property casualty. Again, money from the internal service funds comes as a transfer from the general fund in order to separately account for those expenses. So as we do a small breakdown of several of these funds, the general fund, as I said, is the major fund of the school district and the major source of revenue for all of our daily operations. Right now, for the tentative budget, that is at $839.5 million. That's almost 63% of our total budget. And at this point, we're projecting that we'll have over 90,000 students for the 2015-2016 budget year. So as big as we've ever been and as good as we've ever been as well. So when you look at the FEFP by the numbers, or that is the Florida Education Finance Program, which is the major source of funding within the general fund, and Mr. Sarah was here a little bit earlier breaking down some of this information as far as what we received from the legislature through their work this year. Total revenue that we're receiving in FEFP is $656.6 million. That's almost a $28 million increase from the previous year. It's a 2.1% increase in per pupil funding. And so while the increase looks rather large, 28 million, remember we're looking at over 2,000 new students for next year. So a lot of that increase is about workload, the number of kids that we will have this year as opposed to what we had last year. But it is an increase of 2.1% in per pupil funding. So we're grateful for that increase. It is much needed. As you see, it breaks down to $7,284 per FTE. We're still struggling to get back to the per FTE amount that we had in 2008 at the high. And so we're not back to where we consider fully recovered yet, but we certainly are working at it. That base student allocation did increase $123 almost, so again, a good indication of what the increase was. And as we mentioned earlier, a 7.3% increase in the tax roll. Now, as it relates to the FEFP, that tax roll doesn't really indicate a big increase in funding for us as far as the FEFP is concerned. That just means that a larger portion of what we're receiving through the FEFP, that total $656 million, will be funded by our local property taxes as opposed to the funding that we're receiving through the state. So increases in the tax roll don't necessarily equate to more money for us as far as the FEFP is concerned. So when you look at the breakdown, 42% of that $656.6 million will be funded from state revenues. The rest are coming from what we are generating through our property tax levies with the 5.037 mils that we talked about earlier. When you look at the source of operating revenues and where that breaks down, as we mentioned, about 58% of that is coming from local sources, almost 42% coming from state, with a very small sliver coming from federal funds. And this is only talking about the general fund only. So this does not include the other federal grants that we receive. This is only a general fund breakdown. So where does that money go? And of course, this is only the tentative budget, so numbers will change between now and the final. We'll brief again, but as of right now, in terms of how we have the tentative budget spread out, 68% of it is going to instruction or direct school expenses. We expect that, that percentage to increase as we finalize the budget, but that is where it stands right now. And then you see where the other categories lie. So between instruction or direct school expenses and student transportation, 75% of the budget really goes towards the operation of schools and getting kids to school every day. So the lion's share, absolutely, of the general fund goes towards that purpose. Going to another fund, food service, as I mentioned earlier, it is completely self-sustaining. Our current food service budget for tentative budget, $63.5 million. Again, that includes budget for breakfast for every child at no cost to parents. So every child can have breakfast without any cost every day at every school. The lunch prices do remain the same for next year, for I guess this year, as to say, we're in the current year. So the lunch prices do remain the same for 2016. And remember, we have now coming into play the new community eligibility program that will be going into effect this year, where many of our schools will have every child in the school receiving breakfast and lunch at no cost, at no cost out of pocket to parents to pay for lunch, and of course that reimbursement comes from the federal government. When we look at our special revenue fund, which includes all of our federal grants, major ones of those include Title I, IDEA, Title II, and other federal grants. Now that budget for tentative is currently at $58 million. We do expect that to grow within the next few months because we will continue to budget grants as we receive them. So at the final budget time in September, you can expect that number to be larger than what you see today. And then capital funds, we have currently budgeted at $190.4 million. Local property tax revenues, or that $1.5 million that we're proposing you all approve to levy tonight, is the sole substantial source of property tax revenue. And so that's where we are. We've had many discussions on the capital budget. Now, the capital budget is the one place where the increases or decreases in the tax roll do have quite a direct effect on the revenue that we see inside of this fund, because of course that 1.5 mils is applied to whatever the tax roll is. So increases in the tax roll, and this year 7.3% increase, do equate to some good news within the capital side. Now remember, as we create our 5-year capital plan, we do project for increases in the tax roll inside of that 5-year plan. So we did project for, I believe, a 6% increase. So this increase that we saw this year was a little bit more positive than what we had budgeted for in the 5-year plan. And you'll see the results of that although it's not a substantial increase in what we had projected in the 5-year plan, it is something that's a little bit more positive. So, you know, every little bit of good news, we'll take it. We do plan to take on new COPS debt for the new South Zone High School that the board approved in 2015. And we also have to continue to talk, because we do have to create a plan together for the other two schools that are needed within the 5-year window that we have discussed before. Of course, a major focus within our capital plan is the maintenance and renovations on our existing facilities and technology district-wide. Debt service payments, as we talked before, about $42 million per year on our principal and interest. The statutory debt service capacity, we're at 56% of that. As you all remember, according to statute, you can pay for debt service max 75% of what you earn for your 1.5 mil money. So this year we're talking about $99.5 million then that we're earning on our 1.5 mils. We can only pledge up to 75% of that money to pay for principal and interest payments. Well, we're nowhere near that cap. Right now we're only at 56% of our statutory debt capacity, so that's good news. You all as a board have always encouraged us to only pledge 50% of that as opposed to 75%, and when you look at that half mark, we're at 84% of that capacity. So that number has continued to come down over the past several years, which is a good indication that we're making some headway on our principal amount that we have out there, but we're getting ready to add to that because of the South Zone High School. I wanted to take a minute to put a note in on reserves. We've talked about that in the past. Now, the reserves, of course, are used to protect the district's financial position in the case of emergencies. Our reserves are currently in the budget, and you'll see a special page on all of the reserves in the budget as part of your documentation that you have. It's at $26 million, the reserve for board priorities. Contingency, which is the true emergency fund, and the minimum 3% that the district has to carry, is about $20 million. And so those two pieces, reserve and contingency of $46 million, represent 6.7% of the current revenue that we're bringing into the general fund this year. So that's our indicator. So as a wrap, this budget that we talked about today supports 121 schools, over 90,000 students, as I mentioned earlier. We structured the budget to strive to maintain the initiatives of the state, of course, to support the district's vision and mission, and we're centered on student achievement and the priorities that, as a board, you all set forth in the strategic plan. So we submit this budget today to you in support of our mission, the students and employees of the Lee County School District, and the citizens of Lee County. So what we're asking the board tonight, your actions are to first adopt all the proposed millages for the 2015-2016 tentative budget, to adopt the tentative budget for the 2015-16 fiscal year, and adopt all resolutions related to the millages and the budget.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is public hearing. We will now recess this special board meeting and open the public hearing to consider the adoption of the tentative proposed millage rates and tentative budget for 2015-16. Dr. Graham, please continue by stating your recommendations.
Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2015-16 tentative proposed required local effort millage of 5.037 mils with a proposed amount to be raised of $334,277,552. The required local effort millage includes basic required local effort of 5.019 and a prior period adjustment millage of 0.018. Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2015-16 tentative proposed basic discretionary millage of .748 mils with a proposed amount to be raised of $49,640,582. Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2015-16 tentative proposed capital outlay millage of 1.500 with a proposed amount to be raised of $99,546,622. The total millage will equal 7.285 mils with a total amount to be raised of $483,464,756. The total millage rate to be levied exceeds the rollback rate. It is an increase in the rollback rate of 4.11%. Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the resolution determining revenues and millages levied and the resolution adopting the tentative millage rates for the fiscal year 2015-16. Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the tentative budget and related resolution adopting the tentative budget for the 2015-16 school year as follows. 1, general operating, $839,498,313. 2, special revenue budget, $121,541,399. Debt service budget, $51,461,395. Capital outlay budget, $190,351,021. Internal service budget, $131,160,565. The total tentative budget, $1,334,012,693. Recommend that the Lee County School Board accept the 2015 Certification of Taxable Value for Lee County, Form DR 420S, and authorize the superintendent to complete and execute the form. Recommend that the Lee County School Board schedule a public hearing on the final 2015-16 millage levies and final budget for the 2015-16 school year for Tuesday, September 8th, 2015, at a specially scheduled board meeting to begin at 5:05 p.m. at the Lee County Public Education Center boardroom.
Thank you. At this time, the public will be invited to speak on these matters alone. The time allowed for comment is 3 minutes per speaker. Is there anyone on the right side of the auditorium who wishes to address the board? Anyone on the left? Mr. Fox?
Yes, debt service. I'm back and I'm not going away. As represent the taxpayers of Lee County. There's really no reason for there to be any debt service. The ability to pay cash for buildings as we go along is there. State law provides for it. The use of cops has always been dumb. It was the stupidest thing the state has ever done, is allow school boards to do that. And this district, like many others, has fallen right into that trap. Half-cent sales tax, you can pay for schools one at a time, build them one at a time, keep up with the growth, maintain a nice, orderly way of doing it, instead of building 6 schools at once and having everybody running around doing 4 different projects. You do them, start one, you finish it. There's just a number of great reasons to do it, and it's the way that the school district should operate. And it's up to this board to start putting into practice good financial practices. If you want to be the best district that you can be, start doing it, because you're not. Borrowing money, you build the building, you're still taxing people. So when you say, oh, the taxpayers don't want to pay taxes, you're taxing them. You're not even asking them. You're taxing them, and they have no representation, zero, none. You can do what you want. Taxpayers have no say, and they're being taxed. That's pretty un-American. So let's get with it, board. Let's go to the public. It won't cost anything. Special referendum was cheap enough. Won't cost you a penny. Let the taxpayers decide whether they want to finance their schools or just pay cash for the schools. That's what it really boils down to. $51 million. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And you have the ability to change that. And that's just really what it is because it's not coming from the state. The state doesn't want you out of debt because it puts you right where they want you. When you're in debt, you can't do anything. So they can dictate all they want. Any program, whatever they want to do, they can do, and there's nothing you can do about it. But if you get out of debt, then you're going to have a little more say in what you do with your own schools. Right, Mr. Toiber? Yeah, that sure is. It'd be a good place to be, and that's where we ought to be. And it's a shame that we're not. Thank you very much.
I will now close this public hearing and reconvene the special school board meeting of July 28, 2015. The board will now consider each of the superintendent's recommendations. Dr. Graham, please restate your recommendations individually, allowing the board the opportunity to vote before moving on to the next one.
Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2015-2016 tentative proposed required local effort millage of 5.037 mils with a proposed amount to be raised of $334,277,552. The required local effort millage includes basic required local effort of 5.019 and a prior period adjustment millage of 0.018.
Board members, you have heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Fisher, seconded by Ms. LaRiviere. Any discussion? Mr. Toiber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't be supporting this motion today because Mr. Fox made a very good point about our taxpayers having no voice, and passing this millage, we're not giving them a voice and we're raising taxes. 4.11% we're raising taxes. I believe that we should act more prudently and more efficiently on how we do our business. We are getting a 3% increase from the state as far as per student spending this year. Money's going up. We can go back to the rollback rate, which is getting the same amount of money that we got last year, making it work with what we have. Would actually be a decrease to our taxpayers on their property tax, which is what right now they're carrying all our burden. So we could actually go to the rollback rate of 4.8299. You still have the money that we raised last year, and show our taxpayers that they do have a voice. Because if we raise taxes, they definitely have a voice, and they have it at the election booth. And I would implore them to use that if we continue to raise taxes without their voice. But I also want to give them a voice when we talk about a sales tax. I think Mr. Fox makes a very good point that to get out of this debt, we have to go for a sales tax. Unfortunately, to be able to pass a sales tax, we need everybody else on board. And we can continue to spend, and we raise, and the rollback rate says you're getting the same amount as you got last year, and we're saying, no, we need more, we need more. We're getting more per pupil spending from the state, but we still need more. And we still haven't addressed our capital issues. We're not looking like we're doing things responsibly. In January, we approved the building of LLL that we're going to use COP spending, going more in debt, as Mr. Fox clearly brought out the case. It's a bad way to finance schools, but we need the school, so we said we're going to do that. And reluctantly, I agreed, as well as the rest of the board, but we said we're going to work on a plan to figure out a plan to do that. I presented a plan when we were told about $15 million of unallocated funding. I said, let's take the $25 million that we're moving from capital into operating, take that portion of it, of that $25 million, take 15 of it million back. Then we have the ability, we can actually raise $10 million by adding on our 1.50 capital spending, we can add a 0.25. This board can do it. The caveat of it is that we'd raise 10 million, we'd have to lose 20 million more out of our operating. It's a tough way to go, and we talked about we may not be able to handle both those moves. But to see us not doing anything and just moving on as you know, like nothing's going on here, we just keep on spending, keep on raising rates, keep on raising taxes without any look to how we're doing things better, faster, cheaper, and just at least start drawing a line by saying, look, we're going to use the same money we used last year, we're going to make it work this year, in addition to the state giving us on the RLE another 3% boost per student. So it's not like we're even with the same operating money. We got a 3% per student, and every student counts. So when we have growth, that 3% counts for every other new student that walks in the door. It's that money plus 3% on every one of their backpacks. So at this point, I really think what we need to do is sharpen our pencils, go to the rollback rate, make it work, show the taxpayers that we're sincere, that we're trying to be earnest in our spending of our money, and then earnestly push and show that we do have the need on our capital side to be able to pay for to pay down our debt, to pay for our capital expenditures. Let's do it right, get ahead of the curve so we're not paying our debt service, and put this district back where it needs to be. So I won't be able to support this motion today.
Other discussion, Mrs. Dozier.
Well, I would ask Dr. Graham, is there a reason why we did not go to the rollback rate? And could you give us an explanation as far as why we didn't do that?
Do you want to address that?
Sure. Actually, we cannot, according to state law. In other words, the required local effort millage that we're proposing today is set by the state. And so the state says if you don't levy this required local effort, then you get none of the other funds that the state is actually giving you. So of the $656 million that we're talking about from FEFP, $382.7 million come from local sources, which is this required local effort and the 0.748 discretionary millage that is the next recommendation. $273.9 million of that comes from state sources. So failing to levy the required local effort rate means that we would not receive the other $273.9 million. So the required local effort is set by state. You must show, according to TRIM rules, what the rollback rate is and what the increase the required local effort is over rollback rate, but we don't have the option to not levy required local effort unless we put the other funds at risk.
So,
Mr. Toiber.
Ms.
Oh,
Dozier.
Mrs. Dozier.
Well,
Follow
so that was what I wanted to continue with. So what you're saying is if in fact we went along with denying this and we did not set this rate, because it is the rate that is set by the state, that is correct,
Yeah.
we would stand to lose $273.9 million is what you were saying.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Well, and I understand, Mr. Toiber, what you're talking about, and I understand the frustration that we have with our constituents. However, we are having a public hearing. The public hearing was advertised, And as I'm looking out in the audience, I see a few people from the public here. I do not, I do not see I wish this room were filled with people, and they would be coming forward and they would say, we've got to do something about this. This is not right for Tallahassee to be setting a tax rate for the taxpayers of Lee County in order to get money from the state. But nobody's here to help us with that. So to risk losing the 273.9 million, that's taking a big leap, and I'm sorry I can't support that.
Mr. Toiber?
There's two issues here. Number one is I don't think the public has to be here at 5 o'clock. That's why they hire us. So I think it's our fiduciary duty. However, if that's the case, if we're saying so, the state is forcing us to go above the rollback rate in order to get the funding. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right.
That's what I'm saying, yes.
So the state is forcing us to raise the taxes.
And it's always been that way. We've always done it that way. It's the way it's always been, and unfortunately, you're in between. I think this is where they call you when you're in between a rock and a hard place. That's where we are.
Okay. Yeah, Ms. LaRiviere.
Oh, and then please don't forget, we are a donating district. So they want us to increase it so it can provide more funds for other districts.
Well, yeah, 85% of the money that we give, we get back. I know we lose 15%, but I thought we had the discretion without penalty of keeping at the rollback rate. Mr. Martin?
The discretion that you have is with respect to the next vote.
Right.
The discretionary millage is just that.
Right.
But as Dr. Desmores has explained with respect to the required local effort, that's mandated in order to participate in the FEFP.
Oh, that's true. This is the required versus number two. The next
This is,
Mrs. Dozier.
as I have sat here at this board table, this is the one that I've always talked about. The fact that we are forced to do something that many of us don't want to do. We say that Tallahassee is basically telling us what we will put on the backs of our constituency here in Lee County. And we don't have that option, but instead that option has always been taken away from us. And it would be nice if we could make that decision on our own here at that table, but unfortunately, that's another one of those decisions that have been taken out of our hands and put in the hands of our legislators.
But I guess I just don't know. Mr. Martin, will you clarify for me? So in other words, if the total rollback rate is actually the total of when we're talking about the 7.0 when we're talking about the 7.285 millage, that's the total millage rate. That's the RLE effort. That's all of them. That includes our discretionary. So if we went to the total rollback rate, they're talking about we're 4.11% over the total millage rate. So we could change our discretionary rate and we could still be at the rollback rate and still be in state compliance. Am I incorrect in that?
I can't do the math in my head right away, but you can definitely reduce the discretionary millage. That is your option. It is discretionary as is defined. The discretionary millage, which is the second vote with respect to operating, is into your discretion. The state does set the maximum amount that you can adopt. And the capital outlay is also within your discretion with the maximum amount set in statute.
Okay, and I guess for the sake of discussion, in today's meeting, whatever we approve today, we cannot go higher, but in September, we can go lower.
That's correct.
Okay, so board members, for the sake of discussion, for the sake of not impinging this board's progress, I'm going to support the motions today because we can always have this discussion again after I get a little clearer, because I may be completely confused, and I know Ms. Dozier's nodding her head, but at this point, I will support the motions because I don't want to do something that's going to impede the board's progress, and I definitely, if the state's forcing us to do it, then it's hard to kind of hold us accountable for if the state's putting a gun to your head to say no. So at this point, I will support these motions.
Okay, other discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Dr. Graham?
Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2015-2016 tentative proposed basic discretionary millage of .748 mils with a proposed amount to be raised of $49,640,582.
Board members, you have heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Fisher, seconded by Mrs. LaRiviere. Discussion. Mrs. Dozier.
Now, Mr. Martin, this in fact is what we can change, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, the state sets the maximum, which is the .748, and it is discretionary millage. You have the option to,
Go lower than this.
Yes, ma'am.
But we are at the maximum.
the recommendation
So-
is for that maximum,
Okay.
yes.
But however, if we wanted to go lower, we could go lower. So now my question to you again, Dr. Graham, would be, is there a reason why we did not look at going lower with this proposed amount?
I'm going to let Dr. Desmore answer again, and then I'll add to it if she doesn't say what I'm thinking.
Okay.
So recall, yes, we do have, I think Mr. Toiber mentioned the 2% increase that we have in funding this year, which is a true statement through the FEFP. But I also said that we still are not at the per pupil amount that we were receiving 6 years ago, 7 years ago, back in 2008, with a lot more students now than we had then. And so when we went through the difficult financial times between 2009 and 2012, there were a lot of things that were reduced out of the budget, and we've had discussions before about what those things were, how they went away, many of them not having come back yet. And so at this point, because of all those things, we really are trying to be in a rebuilding stage as opposed to taking things out of the budget at this point that we really feel would harm the educational program. So that's where we were at the time of building this budget for 2016.
Thank you. And I was going to, she says it much more eloquently because she knows the numbers very well. For us to go backwards or to stay right where we are having more children, and I know there's money that comes with more children, but with that also comes more employees, more services, more expectations to provide those services. And we are in a place right now that in many, many areas we're treading water to stay up with the day-to-day operation. And I know the thought is that because of the capital issues, we need to tighten operating. And I just have to say that if we go backwards, we are going to have a very difficult time serving the needs of all our students and employees. That's the reality of our financial situation on the operating side. And I think Dr. Desmore used the right terminology. We are still rebuilding from a time when things were much more dim.
And I did want to remind as well that one of the things that we did do was we talked about reducing that capital to operating transfer, and we did reduce it by $10 million.
Mrs. Dozier.
If you look at the history of funding out of Tallahassee, and you go back, I believe it was either in 2007 or 2008, and we had an increase of 12%, which was an absolute unprecedented amount of funding. We have never seen anything like that. In the history of funding, there's never been anything like it. All of that was because of the inflation that was going on in the real estate market at the time. And, you know, when the bottom fell out, we were clearly communicated with that we would never see that again. And for us to get back to that funding, it was going to take years for us to get back there because of the overwhelming amount of, I don't want to say slush funds or whatever, the overwhelming amount of taxes that were being collected because of all the building, all the growth, and you know, that was going on at that time. And consequently, the legislators were very generous that year, and, you know, as a result, the 67 districts across the state of Florida saw huge increases. But very quickly, those increases went away. You know, just like we've just been granted $2.5 million from the BP spill. you know, and Dr. Graham we've all been told to let her know what we want to do with that $2.5 million. Well, in fact, I started an email this morning, but I didn't finish it. You know, my druthers would be that we don't spend it on something that's a continuing expense. We can't afford to do that. You know, and I've heard people say, let's use it towards raises. Well, that's something that you've got to sustain. And we have to be very, very mindful when we make decisions up here. And I know it's easy for us to say that you know, to roll things back with the operating side, but I also see that back then, we only had, I believe, we didn't even have, I don't even think we had 80,000 students. I think it was like 70-something thousand students, and here we are approaching over 90,000 students. So you're talking about 20,000 more students, you're talking about less money, you're talking about inflation has occurred, and yet educators have always done the same thing. They always stretch those dollars, they always make it work, and unfortunately, that's where we are. We are being forced into making it work again. And I know that this is a tough decision for us to sit here and make at the table, but, you know, to sustain the quality of education that we have, I think Dr. Desamore basically has said to roll back, we are going to be having to pick some very severe cuts that we are going to have to do. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes.
Okay, and that what you're saying is that those cuts would impact the classroom?
It would impact the classroom and the quality of the program that we feel we have in play right now, yes.
Okay, all right, so, and because of that, I don't want to do anything that would impact the classroom, and so I will be supporting this.
Other discussion, Mrs. LaRiviere.
Just one quick question. I know that in the past, the state has said, here, you get this money, and then as the year progresses, they say, oh, but you're not going to get, we're going to take, how much did we have to give money back this year?
Well, in 2015, the year we just finished, the prorations that we ended up seeing throughout the year was about 3.4 million. So yes, we had to give 3.4 million back last year. Believe it or not, we've already had a proration for this current fiscal year before you all have even approved the budget, and so far that proration is about $190,000. And I believe they'll continue to come. We have no reason to believe that they won't.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of.
Other comments? Ms. Fisher?
Well, yes, and as we're rebuilding and as you consistently come to us monthly and give us information, I think it's incumbent on us to do our homework, to listen carefully to the facts that are presented. The situation now is what it is. We have, since the time we had almost all the money we needed, and the bottom fell out, we also have class size amendment, which has impacted our spending.
Yes.
So we have additional requirements. We have over 10,000 more students. We have more needs because of, unfortunately, sometimes state mandates. But at this point, when we're at this point in the year, and we know that we have to approve a budget and be ready to roll. I mean, we have had opportunities in the past to make motions and recommendations that we do other things and accept less. I think we should take the max we get. Our schools belong to the community. Our community does not want cuts in the classroom. They want us to continue with the arts. They want us to continue with sports and all the other things that we do, which make our district a very good one. So my recommendation is that, and if the people had an objection, the room would be full, and they'd be speaking about it. So I think that we need to move forward and take every penny that we can get at this point, and then go out for the sales tax next year and help ourselves that way. Thank you.
Other discussion? Seeing none. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2015-2016 tentative proposed capital outlay millage of 1.500 with a proposed amount to be raised of $99,546,622. The total millage will equal 7.285 mills, with a total amount to be raised of $483,464,756. The total millage rate to be levied exceeds the rollback rate. It is an increase in the rollback rate of 4.11%.
Board members, you have heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
By Mrs. Dozier, seconded by Ms. Fisher. Any discussion? Mrs. Dozier?
I'm just going to very quickly say that, this process is not an easy process. And I know that we have sat here in I don't know how many hours during the course of the last year and talked about budget items. Do you ever keep a running record of how much time you spend presenting to us about the budget? Have you ever done that?
I've never done that. Maybe I'll try that this year, see how it goes.
Well, and the only reason I'm saying that, I'm not trying to be flippant or funny, but instead, maybe some people that are tuning in for the first time or are out here or listening for the first time may think that this is the first time this subject has been brought up. But, this is a subject that I know has probably been on the agenda. I would venture to say maybe once a month.
Yeah, since December, yeah?
And consequently, we have put not just a couple of hours in this, but we've put in hours and hours and hours of discussion on this. So it's not an easy task sitting up here doing this, but unfortunately, that's what we have to do. We are charged with doing this and presenting up and approving a balanced budget for the citizens, so.
Thank you. Other comments? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0.
Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the resolution determining revenues and millages levied and the resolution adopting the tentative millage rates for the fiscal year 2015-2016.
Board members, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by
Second.
Mrs. LaRiviere, seconded by Mrs. Dozier. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0.
Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the tentative budget and related resolution adopting the tentative budget for the 2015-2016 school year as follows. General operating, $839,498,313. Special revenue budget, $121,541,399. Debt service budget, $51,461,395. Capital outlay budget, $190,351,021. Internal service budget, $131,160,565. Total tentative budget, $1,334,012,693.
Board members, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Dozier, seconded by Ms. LaRiviere. Mrs. Dozier.
Well, I'm just going to say, we've had people trickling in, and I've watched as people have trickled in, but this is also set by the state, the time that we're supposed to have this, so maybe we need to tell them they need to change the time, because our constituency is used to having us at a certain time, and the fact that this particular meeting is a very important meeting, and I think that all of these people that have slowly come in might have been here if this meeting, they would have heard all of it if they had been here, when it started. So that's just an FYI. Maybe we need to put that on our legislative platform, I think.
Okay, other comments? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. We only have two more, folks.
Recommend that the Lee County School Board accept the 2015 certification of taxable value for Lee County, Form DR 420S, and authorize the superintendent to complete and execute the form.
Board members, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Dozier, seconded by Ms. LaRiviere. Discussion.
This is just saying we agree with what the tax assessor's saying.
No. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion passes 5-0.
Recommend that the Lee County School Board schedule a public hearing on the final 2015-2016 millage levies and final budget for the 2015-2016 school year for Tuesday, September 8th, 2015, at a specially scheduled board meeting to begin at 5:05 p.m. at the Lee County Public Education Center boardroom.
Board members, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Fisher, seconded by Ms. LaRiviere. Discussion? Mrs. Dozier.
Again, this time is set by the state, not by the Lee County School Board, so we'll make sure again that we publicize it so everyone will know what time it is.
Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Next on the agenda are comments from board members, the board attorney and superintendent. I know, Ms. Fisher? Comments?
No comments at this time, thank you.
Ms. Dozier?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Teuber? Ms. LaRiviere? I have none. None.
I do just want to say that staff spends a tremendous amount of time, as Mrs. Dozier's already alluded to. We are very thoughtful about how we do spend these dollars once you all approve the total budget. So I just want to say that publicly, that we understand that there's an awesome responsibility associated with these funds.
Thank you. At this point, having no other business to come before this body, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mr. Teuber,
Second.
second by Mrs. Fisher. All in favor?
Aye.
5-0. Okay.